Right. Pulled over at this little spot for a pit stop. A, because it's shady, and
Where is it shady?
right, it's shady right here. You guys are welcome to come on over for a story. But there's a place down here called Parashant, right around the corner. It's really in the sun. And it reminds me of a certain person down here. Thought we'd pull over and talk about this inspirational river guide. Talked about John Wesley Powell and all those folks. This is a story about the woman of the river. Georgie White, or Georgie Clark, depends on which book you read. Shredded the boats, flipped everything, just didn't work out. They hiked out. Georgie went back to the drawing board. She came up with this idea. If she took two boats and tied them together, when it got to a rapid, you flipped one over top and you're in that little hole in between. She figured one way or the other, the boat would be upright. She brought her brother on a trip, and they tried to do that. They got to Badger Rapid, boom, flipped over, filled up with water, it's all tied shut. They almost drowned. Georgie's brother cut a hole in the bottom, pulled Georgie's head out, stuck his head out, hiked out, and supposedly didn't talk to her for about a year. But Georgie wasn't beat. She kept coming up with these crazy boat ideas, and the military surplus man was running out of gear. She was buying it all up and ruining it. Well, one day she came up to his shop and said, "Hey, I need some more boats. What do you got?" It's like, geez, there might be one old boat out there by those old pile of rubbers out there. And so she went looking. She didn't find a boat, but she said, "What are those huge rolls of rubber?" I said, "I'll tell you what they are. They're a pain in my rear. They're nothing but rattlesnake habitants living in those things." She said, "No, seriously, what are they?" He said, "Well, what those are bridge pontoons. They're these big donut-looking things. They used to blow them up during the war and put a track across it, and armies and tanks would go across like a bridge." She said, "Shucks, really? Army on it?" I said, "Yeah, they tie them and lash them together and the whole army can march across." She said, "How much will you give them to me for?" And he said, "Well, if you get them out of there without getting bit by snakes, you can have them." So Georgie went and got her pickup truck and a couple of buff firemen, and they dug those things out of that dirt, threw them into the truck, and drove to Lee's Ferry. Dropped that rubber off, and then Georgie went to the hardware store, the liquor store, and every place else. And she showed up at Lee's Ferry with about a mile of rope, all types of things, and she took about 50 cases of Coors beer. She sat out there for about 2 weeks putting this boat together. There was rope everywhere. This thing was like 3 Canyoneers boats tied together, just the end rigger part. And she put a little wooden transom on the back and threw a motor on it. And she stood there drinking her Coors beer with those blue eyes sparkling and said, "Now we're cooking with fire." And her and those firemen jumped on that boat, and they went through. When that thing would hit the rapids, bam! This giant sea of rubber would fold up on itself. Those firemen would put their legs in it, kick it back over, and on through the rapids they go. Georgie did it. She brought the first big boat down here in Grand Canyon. Well, like the owners of this company, he was down here at that time, and those guys would be at Hance Rapid. He was up there. They'd never seen this Georgie lady in their life. And here these guys are carrying all these heavy old wooden boats around the rapids. And up ahead above them, they hear this sound. Wing. Everybody's looking up in the sky, seeing if there's a plane coming around, and it gets louder. Wing. And they look up. And here's this sea of debauchery. There's a bunch of firemen with the big mustaches. Nobody has a lick of clothes on hardly. Coors beer in everybody's hands, and they're singing songs, and they're getting closer to that rapid. And at the helm of this debaucherous garbage scow is this little gal in the back with these sparkling blue eyes. They're like, "What in the world is that?" They're going, "Do they know the rapid's there?" Wham! They hit that rapid, man. Water's flying up. Firemen are grabbing people out the river, throwing them in, and beer's floating down the river. They're like, "What in the world is that?" They didn't have a clue. Whee, on it went. Man, that was weird. Well, I hope I never see that again. Well, Georgie would do a trip like that. And then she'd take her boat right back to Lee's Ferry, grab some other friends and firemen and things like that, and start over again. Now, these wooden boats took a long time to come down because they were carrying their boats around rapids. They'd be down at Lava Falls. Same group of people, same passengers. They're out there in this Grand Canyon heat, carrying all this gear, lining those boats, and they hear that sound again. Whee! They're like, "Oh man, what in the world?" Whee! Now here comes that thing again. 50 new people, a couple other firemen, Everybody's wearing helmets, like football helmets and hard hats and all types of weird things. Everybody's got Coors beers in their hands. And here's that gal with those sparkly blue eyes at the back of this thing. And they would sing a song or so. She would cut the motor, jump down into the back of the boat and hunker down with her Coors beer holding on. And that boat would just go through lava falls any way it went. I mean, just piling up. People are falling out, hanging off the backs. Things are smacking people. There's no hard edges on it. It's all rubber. Bang, bang, boom. And they're like, what in the world is that? And all of a sudden, their passengers are like, they didn't have to carry their stuff around. They were having fun. And she became known as that dang woman. Later to be known as that woman of the river. Well, Georgie started doing those trips more often, and she opened up her actual business. It was called Georgie's Royal River Rats. And it was called a share the expense trip. You would get a list, if you wanted to sign up, of all the stuff you're supposed to bring. It'd be canned goods. Well, first on the list would be some type of head protection. Be helmet with a spike on it. It could be batting helmet, football helmet, hard hat, something for head protection, because things get rowdy on the river. The next thing on that list was all the Coors beer you could get your hands on. In those days, it was hard to get Coors in a lot of places out here. So that's what Georgie liked, the Coors beer. And the next thing would be a list of canned goods. And you'd show up at the ferry, Lee's Ferry, and you'd get off the bus. Everybody'd look around and, we're here for Georgie's trip. And all of a sudden, a big fireman would hit you right in the face with a bucket of sand. Then the next person would come up and hit you with a cold bucket of water. You're like, what? And Georgie'd pop up. If you don't like that, get your rear end on that bus and get back to where you came from. That's how she'd greet you at the ferry. Now, she's getting up there in age at this point. She's a little older, and she had the roughest, toughest firemen as her crew, scaring everybody. And they'd come on those trips, and they'd come down and have a grand time. She'd have like 50 people on her boats. And there'd also be some oar boats, and they'd be scattered and stretched out through the canyon. And she started being renowned for doing the trips down here, being the woman of the river. At lunchtime and at dinner and such, they would just open up the canned goods and set them in an inflatable kiddie pool. And all the labels would be worn off of them, so nobody knew what you got. You'd have peaches, Vienna sausages, and some chili. Everybody just went with their spoon. That's what they did. She drank blackberry brandy and gave Coors out all the time. They say she drank Coors beer all day long, was never drunk. The crew, she trained a lot of phenomenal boatmen and boatwomen down here. They say when you heard the first Coors beer crack in the morning, stay in bed, crew. She don't want to deal with you yet. When you heard that second one, crew better have them cans in the kiddie pool. When you heard that third, your rear end better be on the boat or you're going to get left. That's how she started camp. She'd blow a little bugle to get everybody up. And she did.